By late 1936, J.R.R. Tolkien and his close friend C.S. Lewis had grown tired of the literature of their time. Both being members of the Inklings, they would meet every Thursday and discuss a variety of subjects ranging from new books, myths, philosophy, and most importantly, their current projects. In fact, these meetings were arguably one of the main reasons why The Lord of the Rings was ever finished in the first place, with Tolkien's sharing of his work with his friends serving as an important part of his literary process that spanned over a decade until the trilogy's final release. The problem that these men had started to face, however, and something that would be increasingly mentioned in their meetings, was that they did not find a lot of joy in new stories they read. Both being masterminds of literature, despite their relatively unknown and unpublished status at the time, their enjoyment of the things they read was hindered, with Tolkien and Lewis especially being very particular about the content they consumed. While some may have simply continued to complain without doing much about it, C.S. Lewis approached Tolkien and told him that since there's so few stories out there that they actually enjoyed, they might as well try writing their own. With that in mind, they decided to experiment and attempted to cover a genre that, although they enjoyed, the two men did not have much experience in: sci-fi. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis made a bet on who would be able to write the better science fiction story of the two, and they flipped a coin that would decide who would be the one covering space travel and who time travel. Fate decided that C.S. Lewis would embark on a journey through space, while J.R.R. Tolkien through time. This outcome was very lucky, as Tolkien himself had already been somewhat interested in the idea and philosophy of time travel, and not only that, but he had some new ideas about it that had never really been explored before. C.S. Lewis, inspired by works such as Last and First Men by Olaf Stapledon and David Lindsay's A Voyage to Arcturus, would also be very keen to start working on his own subject, space travel, and would go on to write the incredibly memorable Space Trilogy, whose first book would be published shortly after The Wager in 1938. Through this trilogy that started as a simple wager, Lewis uses the wider theme of space travel and exploration to grapple with morality and theology, recontextualizing numerous biblical stories into this new and fresh medium. The first book, Out of the Silent Planet, which was written as a direct result of the bet, oversees our protagonist Elwyn Ransom assisting in the protection of the planet Mars and its natives from the subjugation of humanity, while discovering the interworkings of the universe itself on a philosophical level. Indeed, something that Lewis himself would be very interested in reading. Beyond that, the protagonist, Elwyn Ransom, after whom the books are sometimes known as the Ransom Trilogy, is thought by many to be inspired by his friend J.R.R. Tolkien, with the character himself being a fellow philologist and veteran of the Great War, though other theories point to Lewis himself. On Tolkien's side of the wager, the professor's time travel story was called The Lost Road, and aimed to connect our modern times with the events of Middle-earth. In it, Tolkien delves deep into his early ideas about a certain Atlantis-like civilization that was corrupted by its hubris with the assistance of an evil figure. He recounts the story of Alboin, a child living in 20th century Britain, who is visited by strange dreams in which he sees a mythical past he did not know of. With the passage of time and by his travels to the Saxon England of the 10th century, he comes to the realization that his dreams are in fact the memories of his ancestors, and through his dreams, the boy travels through history. Eventually, we come to see Alboin grown up, and the boy is shown to have become a professor with a deep love for language and philology. He has a son now, and his name is Aduin, and despite the visions of his early childhood, Alboin leads a relatively normal life. One night, and after many years, his visions return and he sees flashes of Númenor and Ilúvatar, of destruction. But he does not know what to make of them, and he wants a clearer picture. He wishes in his thoughts for a time machine. He wants the ability to travel even further back in time and truly understand what he's experiencing. At that, he hears a voice, the voice of Elendil of ancient Númenor, and the Númenorian invites Alboin and his son to travel through the Lost Road and come with him to the past and the shores of Númenor itself. Tolkien's idea is that the present-day father and son duo, whose names originate in Elf-Friend and Bliss-Friend respectively, find themselves witnessing history through the lens of other father and son duos whose names have the same meanings and who are related by blood to our protagonists in the 20th century. Through Elendil and his son Herendil, our protagonists are guided through one of the earliest versions of the fall of Númenor, and they witness this once great people corrupted and turned to evil with the assistance of the great deceiver Sauron. Sauron has fooled the king Tarkalion, who would eventually be known as Ar-Pharazôn, alongside his people and made them worship the darkness, turning their backs on the Lord of the West. Alboin sees glimpses of a great invasion that would signify the death of Númenor, and at that, the book is abandoned only 4 chapters in. Despite its very short length and the fact that Tolkien abandoned it, The Lost Road was monumental for the development of the legendarium that we know today. It was with this story that Tolkien began to unify his very different and separate myths into one coherent world and history. Though for years Tolkien had grappled with his own version of the Atlantis myth and of Númenor, through The Lost Road we see one of the very first glimpses of the fall of Númenor and of Sauron himself, who would appear in both the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings alongside characters such as Elendil, though Herendil would eventually evolve into Isildur. At the time of the wager, Tolkien was still uncertain about the connection of his true passion project, the Silmarillion, to his newly written Hobbit, with the two worlds being connected after the fact during the time The Lord of the Rings was conceived. The Lost Road would serve as an important stepping stone through which Tolkien's legendarium matured and became what we know today. On a philosophical level, Tolkien's time travel is not the commonly understood, technologically based time travel of science fiction. Instead, his characters travel through their dreams and they use the so-called straight road to be able to look into the past. It is this road that the story is named after, and it is the very same road that would eventually be incorporated into The Lord of the Rings, with our characters using it to travel to Valinor, following its removal from the world after the fall of Númenor. Through the text, we get a better understanding of Tolkien himself, and perhaps how his writings are so connected to this feeling of nostalgia, of wishing to go back and to see for yourself the events of the distant and forgotten past, and managing to do it through your very soul, not some advanced machinery. About the motivations of his father, Christopher Tolkien would go on to say, "He felt that he could say that his most permanent mood had been since childhood the desire to go back, to walk in time perhaps, as men walk on long roads, or to survey it, as men may see the world from a mountain, or the earth as a living map beneath the airship. But in any case, to see with eyes and to hear with ears, to see the lie of old and even forgotten lands, to behold ancient men walking, and hear their languages as they spoke them, in the days before days." As you can see from both the story itself and the quote, Tolkien's idea of time travel was not intrusive. His characters did not change the past or have a role in how events unfolded. Instead, they were witnesses, just like Tolkien wished he himself was a witness to all of the history and the myths he read about and loved so deeply. And moving on, when Albuin asked for a time machine in order to look into the past, he immediately corrects himself by saying that time is not conquered by machines. Time and the ability to traverse it should be something mystical according to Tolkien, not something to be explained away by complicated made-up terminologies or far-fetched science. To him, it is something uniquely human and by extension spiritual, and the professor connected the idea of time travel and genetic memory all the way back in the 1930s, decades before books like Dune were ever released, and even more so games like Assassin's Creed, which would propel the idea to the mainstream. Nonetheless, for Tolkien, genetic memory was not about genetics, but rather the memories our protagonist had access to on a spiritual level. Ultimately, what started as a fun wager between two close friends who wished to challenge themselves evolved for Lewis into a wonderful series of books that further added to his impressive record, and for Tolkien, although he abandoned the idea within a few chapters and its time-traveling successor, the Notion Club Papers, within 100 pages, the wager would go on to provide him a foundation through which he was able to connect his different ideas into one coherent narrative and world that would go down in history as one of the greatest, and thus one of Tolkien's attempts at writing science fiction partly led to what we know as The Lord of the Rings. A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.